Back at the lodge, Polina packed the last of her things. The silence of her room, a stark contrast to the vibrant life she had left behind in the jungle. She felt both emptiness and fullness. Grateful for the experience, yet mourning the separation. She took out her notebook, flipping through sketches of the gorilla, her connection to the forest immortalized in pencil strokes. The next day, as she boarded the plane, Polina looked out over the vast expanse of green that stretched below her. She whispered a quiet goodbye, hoping that somewhere, her friend was safe and well. She knew that the bond they shared would stay with her forever, an unbreakable thread that tied her to the forest and to the creature who had opened her heart. Polina returned home with stories to tell, but there was one she kept close, a sacred memory that needed no words. When people asked about her journey, she would simply smile, a glint of mystery in her eyes. The gorilla had shown her a world beyond human understanding, a connection that existed in glances and gestures, a friendship that would linger long after her footsteps had faded from the forest. The memories of her time with the gorilla would remain, a quiet part of her spirit that would never leave. And though she was miles away from the jungle, she knew that a piece of her heart would always remain there, bound to the wild and to the gentle creature who had become her friend. But today, Michael's taunts seemed sharper, more biting, as if he'd decided to test her limits. He smirked as he leaned on the stable door, looking down at her with a smug expression. "So, Sabrina, still happy picking up after these beasts? Don't you get tired of spending every day covered in dirt?" He sneered, glancing at his friends, who laughed in agreement. Sabrina clenched her jaw, gripping the pitchfork tighter. She had never let their words get to her before, but something about the way he spoke today was different. It wasn't just a passing insult. It was filled with contempt. Michael wasn't merely teasing her, he was challenging her, belittling her love for the horses, mocking her very identity. She tried to ignore him, focusing on her work, but the laughter and insults didn't stop. They grew louder, more mocking, filling the stable with an ugliness that seemed to taint everything she loved about this place. Finally, a surge of anger bubbled up inside her, and for the first time, Sabrina felt herself reach a breaking point. She wasn't about to let Michael or anyone else diminish what she valued so deeply. Without thinking, she strode over to the stall where Woe was kept. Woe was known for his aggressive nature. He was unpredictable, even dangerous, but Sabrina's frustration blinded her to any potential danger. She knew Michael feared Woe, just as everyone else on the ranch did. Maybe, she thought, it was time for him to understand that some things couldn't be mocked, that her passion wasn't a joke. Before she could second-guess herself, Sabrina unlatched the stall door and swung it open. Woe snorted, his eyes flashing with a mixture of curiosity and challenge. Sabrina barely noticed as Michael's laughter abruptly ceased, replaced by a stunned silence. The boys took a step back, their faces pale as they saw the stallion free to move. Michael stammered, a look of genuine fear crossing his face. "You're crazy, Sabrina. Do you have any idea what that horse could do?" he blurted, the bravado in his voice faltering. But Sabrina didn't respond. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. For a moment, she felt powerful, in control. Michael and his friends, who had once held the upper hand with their taunts, were now looking at her with fear. Without another word, the boys turned and ran, their laughter and arrogance left behind in the dust. Once they were gone, Sabrina took a deep breath, her anger fading into a strange sense of relief. Woe hadn't moved. He stood in the stall, watching her with a calm gaze that seemed almost understanding. She hadn't expected him to stay so composed. Most horses would have bolted the moment the door opened, but Woe hadn't. He seemed to sense her turmoil, and in that brief exchange, Sabrina felt as if he understood her more than anyone else on the ranch ever could. Later, Sabrina heard that Michael had gone straight to his father, Mr. William, complaining about what had happened. Mr. William wasn't unaware of his son's tendency to mock the ranch hands, and he knew that Sabrina had only acted out of frustration. Though he promised Michael he would speak to her, his reprimand was gentle. He understood Sabrina's love for the horses and respected her dedication, but he couldn't allow incidents like this to continue. Michael, however, was furious. The humiliation of being bested by a stable girl, especially in front of his friends, was too much for him to bear. He brooded over the incident, his mind churning with thoughts of revenge. He didn't want to let Sabrina walk away unscathed, and as he confided his plans to his friends, a dark scheme began to take shape. What Michael failed to understand was that Sabrina's connection to the horses, especially to Woe, was built on respect, not fear. She saw the horses not as beasts to be dominated, but as beings with thoughts, feelings, and instincts as sharp as any humans. Her patience, dedication, and empathy were things that Michael could never comprehend, and that, more than anything else, was what fueled his resentment. Meanwhile, Sabrina returned to her work, unaware of the plot Michael and his friends were hatching. All she knew was that for a brief moment she had stood up for herself, and it had felt exhilarating. She had a feeling that Woe, too, understood the significance of that moment, and she felt her bond with him deepen. As the day drew to a close, Sabrina took one last look at Woe before heading back. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that whatever lay ahead would test her in ways she had never been tested before. But she knew one thing for certain. Her love for the horses, her respect for their strength and spirit, was unshakable. And with Woe by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. This bond was something no one could take from her, something that even the cruelest taunts could not diminish. With that thought, Sabrina left the stables, her heart filled with a quiet determination and a newfound sense of pride. The days passed with Sabrina back to her routine at the ranch, but something within her had shifted. Her moment of defiance had left her with a renewed sense of strength, though she kept her resolve quiet and unspoken. She poured herself into her work, and her care for the horses became even more profound, especially with Woe. Every interaction with the horses felt more purposeful, a reminder of the connection that fueled her dedication. Meanwhile, Michael hadn't forgotten the humiliation she'd put him through. Driven by a simmering resentment, he and his friends devised a scheme to get back at her. One afternoon, as Sabrina tended to one of the younger, gentler horses, she noticed one of Michael's friends hovering nearby. He wore a look of concern, his voice low and grave as he approached. "Sabrina, there's something wrong with one of the horses," he said, feigning sincerity. "He's not eating, and he seems agitated. Can you take a look?" His tone sounded almost too urgent, but Sabrina's sense of responsibility won over any doubts. She put down her tools and followed him toward the far side of the stable, where the more temperamental horses were kept. Oddly, he hadn't mentioned the horse by name, but Sabrina assumed it was one of the new arrivals, who often struggled to settle in. Her thoughts were focused on what might be wrong, and she didn't notice Michael and another friend positioning themselves just out of sight. As they reached the pen, the boy gestured to a stall in the shadows. "He's in there," he murmured, stepping back as if to give her space. Sabrina moved closer, her mind racing with concerns for the horse's welfare. But the moment she entered, the heavy click of a padlock echoed behind her. She turned sharply, realizing she'd been trapped inside Woe's stall. Her heart dropped as Michael and his friends' laughter filled the air, their faces smug and triumphant. "Enjoy your time with Woe, Sabrina," Michael jeered. "You seem to like him so much after all." The enormity of the situation dawned on her. She was alone with Woe, the notoriously aggressive stallion who had been the subject of countless cautionary tales among the stable hands. Panic threatened to consume her, memories of Woe's unpredictable reactions flashing through her mind. But deep down, a voice told her to stay calm. Woe's nature was fierce. Yes, but she knew there was more to him. A sensitivity and intelligence that few saw beyond his intimidating exterior. Sabrina took a steadying breath, aware that any sudden movement might trigger Woe's defenses. The stallion stood in the corner, his dark eyes studying her with an almost calculating gaze. She avoided direct eye contact, knowing that for horses, a hard stare could come across as a challenge. She reminded herself of her training, the countless hours she'd spent learning about these creatures' behaviors, and the delicate balance needed to communicate with them. Slowly, Sabrina shifted her posture to appear non-threatening, her shoulders relaxed, her movements calm and deliberate. She began to speak softly, murmuring words that came naturally to her, almost as if she were reassuring an old friend. Woe's ears flicked in her direction. His curiosity piqued. The boys outside the stall were waiting for chaos, hoping for a scene of panic. Instead, Sabrina's calm presence diffused the tension, creating an atmosphere entirely different from what they'd intended. Woe took a cautious step forward, his head lowered slightly. Sabrina maintained her composure, allowing him to close the distance on his terms. With her heart pounding, she extended a hand gently, her fingers brushing his nose in a careful, feather-light touch. To her surprise, Woe didn't recoil or show signs of aggression. He stood still, his breath warm against her hand. In that moment, Sabrina felt an unspoken understanding pass between them, a connection that ran deeper than words. Outside, Michael and his friends were watching in stunned silence. The chaotic reaction they'd expected hadn't materialized. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. Sabrina had managed to reach Woe in a way that no one else had before. Even Mr. William, the farm owner, had never approached Woe with such ease. The stallion's notorious nature seemed to melt away under Sabrina's gentle touch, revealing a side of him that no one thought possible. Encouraged by Woe's reaction, Sabrina took a bold step. She began to stroke his mane, her fingers weaving through his soft, silver hair. Her movements were steady, confident, and Woe responded with quiet acceptance, as though he'd been waiting for this moment as much as she had. Sabrina felt a warmth in her chest, an emotion she hadn't anticipated. It was more than respect or admiration. It was a genuine affection, a deep, almost tender feeling she couldn't quite put into words. The stallion's reaction was equally profound. Woe lowered his head further, his posture relaxed as if inviting her trust. Sabrina felt her fear dissolve completely, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. In those few minutes, she realized that Woe wasn't just another horse on the ranch. He was a kindred spirit, a creature whose strength mirrored her own resilience, whose spirit resonated with the unspoken depths of her heart. The boys outside were speechless. Their prank had backfired spectacularly, and they could only watch as Sabrina and Woe shared a connection that defied explanation. For them, horses were simply animals, creatures to be controlled or admired from a distance. But Sabrina had shown them something different, a bond that was built on mutual respect, a partnership that required patience and understanding. Sabrina remained in the stall with Woe, her voice a gentle murmur as she continued to stroke his mane, her hands moving in soothing, rhythmic motions. She wasn't just calming him, she was reassuring herself, finding solace in the presence of this magnificent creature. The warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, felt like a silent promise, a reassurance that she wasn't alone in her world. Eventually, she noticed the boys retreating, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. They hadn't gotten the reaction they'd hoped for, and instead, they'd inadvertently witnessed something remarkable. Sabrina could only hope that they might reflect on what they'd seen, perhaps even gain a newfound respect for the horses they had taken for granted. Left alone with Woe, Sabrina felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her affection for him had blossomed, becoming something she hadn't anticipated. It was a bond as rare as it was beautiful, and she cherished it with a sense of awe. Woe was no longer just a part of her work. He was a part of her life, a piece of her heart that she would protect and nurture with every ounce of her being. As she left the stall, Sabrina cast one last glance at Woe, her gaze lingering on his soft, thoughtful eyes. She knew that her relationship with him had changed in that moment, becoming something infinitely precious. She couldn't have foreseen this connection, but now that it was there, she couldn't imagine her life without it. The ranch, her work, and even the taunts of Michael and his friends faded into the background as Sabrina returned to her duties. Her mind was filled with thoughts of Woe, the moments they had shared, and the strange, powerful emotion that had bloomed within her. It was as if a new chapter had opened in her life, one filled with a deep and abiding bond that she would carry with her always. As Sabrina returned to the stables each morning, she felt an excitement she couldn't explain, a pull that guided her to Woe's stall before she did anything else. The other horses greeted her with the familiar nickers and eager nudges, but Woe remained her first thought, her quiet companion in those early, golden hours. She'd always been dedicated to her work, but this bond with Woe had introduced a layer of connection that made her time with him feel like something more than duty. It felt like an unspoken promise, a gift she cherished deeply. Woe, too, seemed changed. Where he'd once been distant and wary, he now showed signs of warmth, of recognition. When Sabrina approached, she would enter his stall slowly, speaking to him in soft tones, as if sharing secrets only he would understand. Woe would lower his head, and she'd run her fingers along his mane, her touch light, her movements deliberate. His eyes would close in contentment, and she found herself smiling, feeling as if each touch was a small step toward a deeper understanding between them. One crisp morning, Sabrina decided to take Woe out for a ride, something she had only dreamed of until now. She had always admired him from a distance, but after the connection they'd shared in the stall, she felt ready to trust him, and even more, she felt that he was ready to trust her. Carefully, she prepared him, fitting the saddle and bridle with gentle hands, speaking to him softly, assuring him. Woe remained calm, watching her with those steady eyes, a quiet strength in his presence that gave her courage. As she led him out into the open, the other stable hands watched with mixed expressions: curiosity, skepticism, even a touch of admiration. They knew Woe's reputation, knew the countless tales of his defiance. Yet here he was, docile, following Sabrina as if she were his equal, not merely his handler. Michael, who had once been her biggest tormentor, was among those watching, his face unreadable. Sabrina chose to ignore him, focusing entirely on Woe, their bond now unbreakable and unique. Mounting Woe was an experience Sabrina would never forget. The moment her body settled against his, she felt the sheer power of him beneath her, a creature of muscle and grace. Yet, despite his strength, he moved gently, attuned to her every shift and command. With a soft click of her tongue, they began to move, each step a testament to their mutual trust. Sabrina felt a rush of exhilaration, the wind brushing against her face, the world blurring around them as Woe's powerful strides carried them forward. In those moments, Sabrina forgot everything. The taunts, the hardships, even the people around her. It was just her and Woe, their worlds aligned, a rhythm only they shared. She leaned forward, her hands resting on his mane, feeling the pulse of his spirit beneath her. It was more than a ride, it was a dance, an intimate exchange that required no words. She whispered his name, her voice barely audible over the wind, and he responded, his ears flicking back, acknowledging her presence in a way that felt almost human. Over the days that followed, Sabrina and Woe continued to ride together, their bond growing stronger with each shared sunrise and sunset. Their connection had deepened into something almost sacred, a feeling that transcended mere companionship. She began to see him not only as a horse, but as a partner, a soul who understood her in ways that no one else did. Each time she touched him, she felt a gentle, comforting warmth that made her heart race and her worries vanish. Their rides became a regular ritual, and with each journey, Sabrina grew more attuned to Woe's moods, his preferences, even the subtle changes in his energy. He responded to her with an attentiveness that others found astonishing. If she was having a difficult day, he would sense it, his behavior softening as if to comfort her. Sabrina found herself talking to him, sharing her thoughts, her dreams, and even her fears. She felt that he listened, and in his quiet way, he seemed to understand. One afternoon, as they returned from a long ride, Sabrina decided to stay with Woe a bit longer. She led him back to his stall, but instead of leaving right away, she lingered, brushing his mane with gentle strokes. The stables were quiet, the light dimming as the sun set. She spoke to him softly, her words filled with gratitude and affection. Woe remained still, his gaze locked on hers, and Sabrina felt her heart swell with a warmth she hadn't anticipated. It was in this quiet, intimate moment that she realized the depth of her feelings. What she felt for Woe went beyond admiration or even friendship. It was a kind of love, one that was pure and boundless, untainted by expectation or judgment. She didn't need to explain it to anyone, she simply knew that Woe was special to her, that their bond was a part of who she was now. She felt a joy that was both exhilarating and humbling, a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. Her growing attachment to Woe didn't go unnoticed. The other stable hands observed the way she looked at him, the gentleness in her touch and the unspoken connection they shared. They saw how Woe, once known for his unpredictable nature, now acted with a calmness that only Sabrina could bring out in him. Even Mr. William, the owner, began to acknowledge the change, a quiet respect in his gaze whenever he watched them together. Sabrina's relationship with Woe transformed her work at the ranch. The other horses sensed her joy, responding to her with an eagerness that made each day a pleasure. She felt her purpose more clearly than ever, her dedication to her role intensifying. The stables, once merely a place of work, became a space of belonging and fulfillment. The bond she shared with Woe had brought new meaning to her life, a depth she hadn't known was possible. Meanwhile, Michael watched from the sidelines, his former sneers replaced by a subdued, almost begrudging respect. He had tried to diminish her spirit, to undermine her confidence, but he now saw strength in her that he couldn't touch. Sabrina's unyielding love for the horses, her unwavering bond with Woe, had given her a resilience he hadn't anticipated. The connection between her and Woe was something he could neither replicate nor destroy. Sabrina knew her bond with Woe was rare, a gift that fate had granted her, and she cherished it with a fierce protectiveness. As she worked each day, she felt Woe's presence like a comforting shadow, his gaze following her from the stall, his quiet strength a reminder of the loyalty they shared. She knew that no matter what challenges came her way, she had a partner who would stand by her side, a spirit as wild and free as her own. This bond's love she felt needed no explanation or justification. It was something sacred, a part of her very being. With Woe, Sabrina had found a kindred spirit, a creature whose heart beat in time with hers, whose silent understanding was worth more than words. And as she stood with him each day, she felt as if she'd found a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. The summer days stretched long and hot, and Sabrina's life at the ranch settled into a comforting rhythm alongside Woe. But as the days passed, Michael's frustration only deepened. The quiet admiration he'd once harbored had curdled into something resentful, a mix of jealousy and unresolved pride that shadowed his every encounter with Sabrina. Watching her with Woe had become almost unbearable for him, and he found himself wanting, desperately, to break the bond she had with the Stallion. One afternoon, as Sabrina worked alone in the stables, she heard the distant, hurried footsteps of Michael and his friends approaching. She glanced over her shoulder, noticing their tense expressions, and something in their demeanor set her on edge. They approached her with forced calm, masking their true intentions beneath casual smiles. "Hey, Sabrina," Michael began, his tone deceptively light. "There's something wrong with one of the fences by the north pasture. Could you check it out? It might be dangerous if one of the horses gets loose." Sabrina felt a flicker of suspicion, but her dedication to the horses overrode her doubts. She nodded, setting down her work and heading towards the north pasture, unaware of the trap that Michael had set in motion. As she disappeared from view, Michael's friends moved quickly to Woe's stall, unlocking the door and nudging him out into the open field. Their plan was simple: create a situation that would throw Sabrina and Woe into a moment of danger, a scenario that, they hoped, would put her in her place. Sabrina's mind was on the fence repairs when she heard a sudden commotion behind her. She turned to see Woe, untethered, moving freely across the pasture, his gait quick and nervous. Panic shot through her as she realized the risk: an open field, Woe's unpredictable nature, and Michael's smug gaze from the sidelines. She rushed towards Woe, her instincts kicking in, her focus entirely on reaching him before something went wrong. The closer she got, the more she could see the agitation in Woe's stance. He wasn't used to being out here without her close presence, and the vast open space seemed to unsettle him. Sabrina's voice was calm as she approached, calling his name in a low, soothing tone. Woe's ears flicked at her voice, his body tensing, his powerful legs ready to bolt. She could sense his fear, the wildness that simmered just beneath his skin, and she knew that the wrong move could push him beyond reach. Sabrina slowed her steps, her gaze steady and soft, a reminder of their bond, the trust they had built in countless quiet moments. She extended her hand, palm open, showing him that she was there, that he wasn't alone. The boys watched, waiting for the chaos they hoped would unfold, their expressions gleeful with anticipation. But Sabrina didn't falter. Her focus was entirely on Woe, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Woe's gaze locked onto hers, and she saw the struggle in his eyes, a flash of wildness giving way to something familiar, something safe. Her hand met his muzzle, her touch light, steady. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the heartbeat under his skin, fast and frightened. But with each passing second, Wo began to calm, his breathing slowing, his stance softening. Sabrina's quiet strength had reached him, grounding him, bringing him back to the center of their trust. Just when she thought they'd overcome the ordeal, a sudden shout echoed across the pasture. One of Michael's friends, frustrated that their plan wasn't unfolding as expected, had picked up a nearby stone and hurled it, aiming to startle Wo. The stone struck the ground near his hooves, sending a sharp, loud crack through the air. Wo reared back, his powerful legs kicking out as his fear surged, his instincts urging him to flee. Sabrina held her ground, her voice rising above the chaos, her words a steady stream of reassurance. "Wo, it's okay. I'm here. Stay with me." She reached for his bridle, her fingers brushing the leather as he bucked and shifted. But her presence, her calm, unwavering voice, anchored him, pulling him back from the edge of panic. Slowly, Wo's breathing evened out, his movements less frantic, until he finally stilled, his head lowering to rest against her shoulder. Michael and his friends stood in stunned silence, their planned chaos dissolved into awe. Sabrina's courage, her bond with Wo, was something they hadn't anticipated, and it left them speechless. Their prank, meant to embarrass her, had only highlighted the strength of her connection with the stallion. They watched as Sabrina led Wo back to his stall, her hand never leaving his side, her presence a constant reassurance. Back in the stables, Sabrina stroked Wo's mane, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She could feel the lingering tremor in Wo's body, the remnants of fear slowly dissipating under her touch. Her heart ached at the thought of the danger he had been put in, the trust he had placed in her despite the chaos. She knew now, more than ever, that their bond was something unbreakable, a partnership forged in both peace and peril. When Mr. William returned later that day, he noticed the quiet tension in the stable, the way Sabrina's gaze lingered on Wo, a mixture of relief and protectiveness in her eyes. She explained what had happened, her voice steady, but Mr. William could see the weight of the experience in her expression. He didn't reprimand her. Instead, he nodded, a hint of respect in his gaze. He saw what Sabrina and Wo had, something rare, a connection that defied the boundaries between human and animal. Over the following days, Sabrina's awareness of Wo's every mood deepened. She could sense the slightest shift in his energy, the way his gaze softened when he saw her, the way his muscles relaxed under her touch. She found herself spending more time with him, not out of duty, but out of a desire to be near him, to nurture the bond they shared. The ranch, the people, even Michael's occasional sneers faded into the background when she was with Wo. Their rides took on a new depth, a silent understanding woven into every stride, every turn. Sabrina didn't need to guide him. It was as if Wo knew her thoughts, responding to her unspoken wishes, moving with a grace and intuition that left her in awe. They were a team, a single heartbeat, connected by trust, by the memories of moments shared in both calm and chaos. Michael's bitterness lingered, his pride wounded, but even he couldn't deny the bond between Sabrina and Wo. The ranch hands spoke of it in hushed tones, a respect growing for the girl who had tamed the untamable, who had shown them the strength of loyalty and love. Sabrina was no longer just a worker in the stables, she was Wo's partner, a title earned through courage and kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the stables in a warm, golden light, Sabrina led Wo back from a long ride. The world around them was quiet, the only sound the soft crunch of gravel beneath his hooves and the gentle murmur of the evening breeze. Sabrina felt a peace settle over her, a fulfillment that ran deeper than words. She knew, without a doubt, that Wo was more than a horse to her. He was a companion, a friend, and something infinitely precious, a bond that had grown beyond anything she'd ever known. As she guided him into his stall, Wo turned, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. It was a look that held understanding, gratitude, and something she dared to believe was love. Sabrina reached out, her fingers brushing his forehead, and in that quiet, still moment, she knew that Wo trusted her as completely as she trusted him. Their bond was something sacred, an unbreakable connection that time and trials had only strengthened. Their eyes met like a spark in the darkness, a silent exchange that ignited something wild and unbridled. The big black horse's gaze was a slow-burning flame, simmering with unbridled intensity, drawing her in with a magnetic pull. Their hands met in a fleeting electric touch that sent shivers down their spines, a touch that hinted at depths waiting to be explored, like two energies had finally met and created an irresistible attraction. There were no words, just gestures that lasted a second longer. The big black horse's hand slid up her arm, sending a shiver through her, a subtle invitation that made her pulse quicken. Their gazes locked, and for that moment, the world around them faded, leaving only the unspoken electricity crackling between them, each heartbeat drawing them closer. The distance between them narrowed with each passing second, each delicate movement becoming more intense. The big black horse's bat, strong and unyielding, approached her hidden garden, a place of softness and warmth. Each touch, each caress, was like a wordless symphony, a crescendo of passion where each note resonated deeper, their breathing synchronized in a rising melody. They moved like the ebb and flow of waves, each touch pulling them into a rhythm that was both natural and unstoppable. Her garden opened up to the big black horse's exploration, inviting, each petal giving way to the big black horse's touch, a silent harmony between them. As the rhythm reached its peak, they were lost in each other's storm, the world fading into a blissful blur. Each touch was a powerful wave crashing against the shore, a force that no one could resist, filling the air with the intensity of a silent thunderclap. It was a dance of energy and fire, each movement rising, each breath a beat in their shared symphony until they finally reached the top together, lost in the pounding waves of sensation. When the storm subsided, they lay entwined, their breathing slowing at the same time, the world bathing in a soft, lingering warmth. The silence that followed was filled with peace, a quiet contentment that held them together, basking in the glow of a shared moment that was both solid and utterly liberating. They were whole, their hearts steady, lying side by side in the calm after the wave. For Sabrina, there was no greater joy, no deeper fulfillment than the life she shared with Woe. The stables, once merely a place of work, had become a sanctuary, a world where she was understood and valued, where she had found a friendship that transcended words. In Woe, she had found not only a partner, but a piece of herself, a part of her soul that she would protect and cherish forever. With each passing day, Sabrina found herself more connected to Woe than she had ever imagined. The bond they had shared through trials and peaceful moments was now woven into the very fabric of her life. She had always known the stables were special, but now they felt like a place of destiny, a space where she had found a purpose and a love beyond words. The laughter of the other stable hands and the background hum of the ranch were merely echoes. Her world had narrowed to include only Woe and the quiet harmony they had created together. One autumn morning, Sabrina arrived at the stables to find Mr. William waiting for her. His usual stern demeanor was softened, his gaze filled with an understanding she hadn't seen before. He gestured for her to follow him out toward the pasture, where Woe stood grazing in the golden sunlight, his white coat almost glowing against the amber fields. "Sabrina," Mr. William began, his voice steady, "you've done something remarkable here. I've watched you and Woe, seen the way you two connect. I knew he was a spirited creature, almost untamable, but you've brought out a gentleness in him that I didn't think was possible." Sabrina felt a surge of pride, a quiet thrill at Mr. William's acknowledgement. His words were a testament to the journey she and Woe had shared, a validation of the bond that had grown in ways neither of them could have anticipated. "I think Woe has found his place with you," Mr. William continued. "It's rare, you know. Horses like him, they don't often connect with people like that. I've decided that Woe is yours to care for as long as you're here. He trusts you, Sabrina, and that's something even I can't command." Overwhelmed, Sabrina looked out at Woe, the beautiful creature who had become more than a horse to her. She approached him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. Mr. Williams' gesture meant more than words. It was the gift of companionship, a recognition of her dedication, and an acknowledgement of the love she held for Woe. In the weeks that followed, Sabrina's bond with Woe deepened even further. She no longer felt like just a caretaker. She felt like his partner, his equal, someone he looked to, not out of obedience, but out of genuine connection. Their rides took on an air of adventure, each one filled with the quiet joy of discovery, of a shared rhythm that needed no words. Whether galloping across open fields or navigating the winding trails that bordered the ranch, they moved as one, Sabrina's hands light on the reins, Woe's trust implicit in every stride. Their companionship extended beyond the rides. Sabrina often found herself in Woe's stall long after her duties were finished, leaning against him as she shared the details of her day. He listened with an attentiveness that went beyond mere familiarity. She felt his warm breath, steady and calm, as if grounding her in the present, reminding her of the bond they shared. Every time his muzzle brushed her shoulder, every nuzzle of his head against her hand, Sabrina felt a love that was pure and honest, a connection that needed no explanation. Michael and his friends gradually faded into the background. Their pranks and sneers had ceased, replaced by a quiet respect for Sabrina and her unique relationship with Woe. They had come to see her not as a girl simply working in the stables, but as a guardian of something sacred, a bond that even they couldn't deny. Michael, in particular, seemed to have changed, his initial resentment giving way to a grudging acknowledgement of the strength he saw in Sabrina. She hadn't defeated him. She had simply shown him a different kind of strength, one rooted in compassion and patience. One crisp evening, as the sun cast its last rays over the ranch, Sabrina took Woe out for a final ride before winter set in. The world was quiet, the only sounds the soft thud of his hooves and the rustle of leaves. She felt the cool wind against her skin, the steady rhythm of Woe's movements, and a sense of peace that filled her to the brim. They rode through the fields, the landscape bathed in golden light, and Sabrina felt an overwhelming gratitude for every moment they had shared. As they returned to the stables, Sabrina dismounted and took a moment to stand beside Woe, her hand resting on his neck. The other stable hands were gathering their belongings, preparing to leave for the night, but Sabrina lingered, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment. Woe's eyes met hers, his gaze soft and filled with a trust that had taken months to build. In that gaze, Sabrina saw not only a companion, but a friend, a soul who had mirrored her strength, her fears, and her dreams. That night, as she closed up the stables, Sabrina felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The ranch, which had once been a place of work, had become her home, a sanctuary where she had found love, purpose, and friendship. Woe was more than a horse. He was a part of her soul, a piece of her heart that had healed in ways she hadn't known were possible. Together, they had weathered trials, shared joys, and discovered a partnership that was rare and beautiful. In the months and years that followed, Sabrina and Woe remained inseparable. The ranch hands spoke of them with reverence, their bond a tale passed down among new workers, a story of trust, of patience, and of a love that transcended words. And as Sabrina walked through the fields each morning, Woe by her side, she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling of home that filled her with quiet joy. Sabrina knew that no matter where life took her, Woe would always be with her in spirit, a symbol of the strength and resilience that had defined her journey. Their story was one of devotion, of a connection that defied explanation, a love that was as timeless as the fields they roamed. And in every breath, every heartbeat, she carried with her the memory of a bond that was, in every sense, a part of her.